Regional Trade Governance. This presentation will explain the introduction of regional trade governance, political economy of preferential trade agreement, the domestic politics of PTA formation, the international politics and PTA formation, the politics of institutional design in regional trade governance.
Before we learn about regional trade governance, first, I will explain about the preferential trade agreements or PTA. Because the proliferation of preferential trade agreements, PTAs, is the most prominent and prevalent feature of regional trade governance in the contemporary international economy. PTAs liberalize trade between partner countries, granting member states preferential access to each other's markets. They also function as an important driver of economic regionalism, or regional institution building, in which states actively cooperate and coordinate their trade, and sometimes other, policies. Regional trade governance is the combination of formal and informal institutions that regulate and manage trade between countries, usually but not always delimited by the geographical scope of a particular region. Why do states form preferential trade agreements? There are two explanations to answer this question: the domestic politics of PTA formation and the international politics of PTA formation. The domestic politics of PTA formation. Preferential trade agreements liberalize trade between member states, but discriminate against third parties. Such discrimination generates rents for certain domestic actors that may constitute a potent source of support for PTA formation and maintenance. Industries that could ward off competitors located in third parties or expand their share of international markets if they were covered by a PTA have obvious reasons to press for its establishment. So do export-oriented industries that stand to benefit from preferential access to foreign markets afforded by a PTA. Exporters in industries marked by economies of scale have particular reasons to lobby for PTAs. Membership will furnish them with access to a larger market, thereby helping them reduce production costs and increase profitability. Multinational corporations also have reason to support PTAs that protect their trading and production networks. Some observers maintain that the feasibility of creating a regional agreement depends on prospective members having relatively similar economic or political institutions. If trade liberalization requires harmonization in a broad sense, such as in the Single European Act, then the more homogeneous are members' national institutions, the easier it may be for them to agree on common regional policies and institutions. Others point out that countries in close geographic proximity have much less impetus to establish regional arrangements if their political institutions differ significantly. International politics and PTA formation. In addition to domestic politics, interstate power and security relations, as well as multilateral institutions and strategic interaction among states play key roles in shaping regionalism. Political power and interstate conflict. Central to the relationship between interstate political relations and the formation of PTAs are the effects of trade on states' political military power. The efficiency gains from open trade promote the growth of national income, which can be used to enhance states' political military capacity. Countries cannot ignore the security externalities stemming from commerce without jeopardizing their political well-being. Countries can attend to these externalities by trading more freely with their political military allies than with other states. Allied states that form PTAs bolster their overall political military capacity and, in doing so, promote the common security aims of members. Multilateral institutions and strategic interaction. Most contemporary PTAs have been established under the auspices of the WTO and its predecessor, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT. Parties to the GATT/WTO may have established PTAs at such a rapid rate during the past 60 years because they viewed regional liberalization as a stepping stone to multilateral liberalization, a central premise of those who believe that preferential arrangements serve as building blocks to global trade openness. Alternatively, GATT/WTO members may have formed such arrangements to partially offset progressively deeper cuts in protection made at the multilateral level and to protect uncompetitive sectors. A chief fear of those who view PTAs as stumbling blocks to multilateral liberalization is that arrangements formed for these reasons will divert trade and undermine future efforts at multilateral liberalization. PTA's establishment can prompt fears by third parties that the agreement would undermine their competitiveness, thereby inducing them to form a rival bloc. Similarly, a state entering an existing PTA may provoke concern on the part of its economic rivals that they will be placed at a competitive disadvantage in international markets, unless they respond in kind. In addition, PTAs might form and expand in reaction to one another because they usually have more aggregate market power and thus more bargaining power than their constituent members. Various Latin American countries, for example, established PTAs over the past decade to improve their leverage in negotiations with the US and NAFTA. Likewise, the EEC's original members believed that its creation would enhance their bargaining power in negotiations with the US, and participants in the Central European Free Trade Area hoped its formation would bolster their ability to negotiate entrance into the EC and EU. The politics of institutional design in regional trade governance. The most recent scholarship on PTAs and regional trade governance centers on issues of institutional design. Such studies have sharpened the analytical lens on specific provisions of trade agreements to ascertain the nature and extent of liberalization encoded in them. Deep integration PTAs. A recent report issued by the WTO, 2011, identifies the rise of deep PTAs as an important new development in the design of trade agreements. The existing literature identifies several key political factors that affect PTA depth integration. 1. Downes, Rock, and Barsoom argue that deep integration is best achieved if a small group of countries with an interest in such depth initially form a PTA. Afterwards, countries with different interest can be allowed to join, but only if they agree to abide by the terms established by the original signatories. 2. Neo-functionalists argued that integration occurs when economic transactions become dense enough among a group of countries that organized economic interests benefiting from these transactions pressure governments to manage economic interdependence by centralizing policies and creating common institutions. Neo-functionalists stress that any initial decision to integrate because of such dense transaction networks produces, and unintentionally creates, both economic and political spillovers that ultimately deepen regional integration. Cooperation between countries on certain economic issues is likely to trigger cooperation in other related areas. 3. The number of domestic veto players in member states may affect the depth of integration in PTAs. As the number of veto players rises, domestic ratification of a deep PTA becomes more difficult. 4. Domestic institutions may also influence the depth of integration. One possibility is that democracies tend to enter deeper PTAs than other regime types. Since leaders cannot credibly commit to ignore special interest, p. 332, pleading for trade protection, voters may hold heads of state responsible for adverse economic conditions stemming from protectionism even if these economic conditions were not caused by policies driven by the demands of special interests. 5. Political-military relations may affect the depth of integration among PTA members. In PTAs composed of allies, the economic gains from deep liberalization bolster the alliance's overall political-military capacity, and the common security aims of members attenuate the political risks that states benefiting less from the arrangement might otherwise face from those benefiting more. Dispute settlement. In addition to the depth of PTAs, another strand of research on the institutional design of these agreements centers on the avenues available for resolving trade disputes among members. Larger states prefer more legalized dispute settlement mechanisms and that such arrangements are more likely to exist in PTAs marked by considerable size inequalities among members. Only in cases where the proposed depth of integration is extensive, common markets, do PTAs characterized by a relatively uniform size distribution enact legalized dispute settlement. Similarly, the issue of forum shopping in dispute settlement. He argues that states that are members of both a PTA and the WTO are highly strategic in deciding in which setting to file a dispute. The decision of where to file the dispute hinges on both the forum that is likely to yield the preferred ruling for a complainant, but also where the precedent generated by the ruling will provide the greatest future benefit for a prospective plaintiff. Flexibility. Studies have also examined the factors affecting the design of flexibility mechanisms, such as trade remedies and other provisions that allow countries temporarily to suspend their trade liberalization commitments in the face of exogenous shocks. PTAs that allow governments some discretionary policy space help to ameliorate domestic uncertainty. Where exogenous shocks give rise to domestic pressures for protectionism, governments may welcome agreements with mechanisms that provide for a temporary respite without entailing a complete exit from the agreement. The inclusion of escape clauses is optimal for addressing domestic uncertainty by allowing governments to respond to protectionist pressures. Finite duration agreements and renegotiation allow the possibility of more flexible agreements. Investigating the political economy of flexibility provisions, import competing industries benefit from flexibility provisions in PTAs while export-dependent industries incur the costs.